If addiction starts way before we think it does? Could we treat it like something like diabetes, having a pre-addiction phase where we give interventions when we think that they're likely to become addicted? It's a theory that some of the most famous drug scientists in the field are proposing, but one that's actually going to be very hard to implement. So, is this a thing that we can do, and how would we start doing this? So we see that not everyone who uses drugs actually develops an addiction to them. And it typically is a minority of people, although it depends on the drugs themselves. Like they vary wildly. So for something like nicotine, we see that, yeah, about 70% of people who start using nicotine will become addicted to it, like develop a substance use disorder for it. But we see that rates for things like alcohol and Coke are closer to like 1 out of every 5 people. And for something like weed, it's 1 out of every 10. So, not everyone becomes addicted, and our view of addiction has also changed wildly over the years, too. So, we started by thinking that kind of addiction was a willpower issue. Like, oh, if you just say no, it's going to be fine. And that obviously did not work. Like, let's see how terribly Dare went. And then we moved on to this, like, oh, yes, and it is like tolerance and withdrawal to the drug that's the main problem. So, some of these drugs have terrible withdrawal, makes people more likely to continue to use them. And so, that's addiction. And then more recently, we've been kind of focused on this brain disease model of addiction. So this idea that like addiction is like a cancer in your brain. So the drug has basically like taken over your system and you have impaired control from that. Now, from a drug scientist perspective, I can easily say that it's not really any of those things. Like, yes, there is an aspect of like, if you don't use it, you can't ever become addicted. But there are all sorts of reasons people start taking drugs and continue to use drugs. So yeah, just maybe you're having a terrible time in life. Like maybe all of your friends are doing it. That is a reason why a lot of people will start using. And once you start using, it's incredibly hard to quit. Maybe you're self-medicating with the drug. So if you stop using it, it'll make your life worse. Like there's all sorts of reasons people continue to use. And it's a combination of all these things. So yes, drugs do change the chemistry in your brain. And so that leads to you being more likely to keep using them. But also there's psychological and social factors that go into addiction. So it's not just a single one of these things. But no matter what, we see that there is an aspect of biology linked to addiction. So there are genes that make it more likely for people to become addicted. If your parents used, you might have epigenetic factors that make you more likely to become addicted. Maybe you're more sensitive to stress. Maybe you're less sensitive to dopamine. Like all of those things can change how likely you are to become addicted. And so the leading neuroscientists who study this, so Thomas McClellan, Nora Volkow, who's currently the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, so the people who funds most researchers like me, and then also George Koob, who is one of the main drug researchers in the field of reward. All of those people came together and said, like, what about pre-addiction? What about if we coin this term and have people do research into this? What if this becomes the new public health policy? And so the concept of pre-addiction is exactly the same as it is for pre-diabetes and like pre-cancerous things. They are basically capitalizing on that like pre-scary thing. Like pre-diabetes is a warning for people to say you can stop this before it turns into full-blown diabetes. And that's the theory of pre-addiction. It's basically saying you can stop this before you become a person who fully has addiction. Now, addiction in the way that this article describes it is basically having severe substance use disorder. So what we see is that there's basically 11 criteria for what we consider substance use disorder. And severe substance use disorder is meeting 6 of the criteria. So the 11 criteria for things like substance use dependence are divided into kind of 4 main categories. So you have things like dependence. So that is tolerance and withdrawal. Do you have to use more and more of the drugs to feel the effects? And once you quit using, do you have negative effects? That is withdrawal and that is tolerance, and those are physical dependence. Now, physical dependence is not enough to be considered addiction. It is one of the criteria, and if you're using the medication for medical purposes, that kind of negates this category. So yes, people can be dependent on opioids, but not addicted, and you also can be addicted to opioids as well as dependent on them. Then you have things like social impairment. So you stop doing things that you previously liked to do. You have problems at like your work or in social relationships because of your use of the drug. You're less likely to fulfill obligations because you're using that drug. And then there's also things like impaired control. Like you want to keep using more and more of it. You crave it, you try to quit, but you can't. You spend a ton of time either getting a hold of it or using it or trying to get over having just used it. So things like hangovers. And finally, you have risky use. You're using the drug in things like unsafe environments, or it's causing things like harm to your body or to your psychological self too. Now, the concept of pre-addiction is saying that, like, yes, there are some people who have 6 of those 11 criteria. And so those people would be considered having addiction. So they have severe substance use disorder. But only about 5% of people will actually meet that criteria of 6 or more. We see that like 13% of people have around 4 or 5 of those specific criteria. So they're basically saying that, like, they might have pre-addiction. Like, they're almost there, but they haven't officially tipped over that side yet. So these authors of the paper are basically saying that, like, we should treat addiction kind of like pre-diabetes. So we should say that this is like pre or early stage substance use disorder. And so we're treating them with interventions that are specifically for this time. So like they say that pre-diabetes is not using the exact same treatments. They're not just like necessarily giving insulin. They're like, here are these interventions. Here are these things that these people need to do. Here are these drugs that we can give to help prevent it from doing this, from tipping over into actual diabetes. And they're saying that, yeah, same concept with things like substance use disorder. So they're saying for like something like pre-addiction, you could do things like CBT and have these early interventions. Now, side note, I went on a weird corner of the internet and found a whole bunch of people who are hating on CBT, but I am not a therapist, so please let me know if there's some sort of weird thing that's happening with that I'm not aware of. But yes, there are interventions like CBT that can be designed to help with people who have that pre-stage before it becomes the addiction stage. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this idea because the original paper for this came out in 2022 and like work was pretty much immediately being done. Like within a month, there was another paper that's like, hey, here are these genes that we should be looking at for these like pre-addiction risk, which how did you do that within a month? That makes me a little bit curious there. But I'm asking your thoughts because there's no like objective thing that we can actually use right now. Like pre-diabetes has like, here are the blood glucose levels and here's like the insulin resistance, and like those things can help determine if somebody's on that path. But we don't really have that for addiction. Like there are so many different things that go into it. And like genes play a role, but so does everything else. The authors of the genetic paper are also like, oh yeah, we can come up with personality profiles too. And then we can see if somebody's at risk of becoming addicted. And like, this is super helpful. And in a way, it is incredibly helpful. Like if we figure out what people are more likely to be at risk, we can help figure out that kind of specific treatment that might help those groups of people. But also, I've seen Gattaca. I've seen what happens when we have people who are at risk for certain things and what that can lead to. Like I know the slippery slope side of things. I've seen this film before and I didn't like the ending. So this is an interesting idea, but I want to hear your thoughts on the ethics of this and if we should continue to go for it, because this is a major shift to things like public health and public safety reform. And this would be a lot of time, energy, and money put into this technique. So what do you think?